The story kicks off with our main character catching some news about rumors that are messing with Guy's confidence. Back in the day, women were viewed as smart and capable of achieving great things. While he's reading this, he's left wondering what kind of world he's been thrown back into. It's been 2 days since he landed in this new world, and he's still struggling with his heavy mortal body. Before this whole situation, he was the emperor in his previous life. But now, every time he checks the news, all he sees are reports of guys getting hurt. This modern world doesn't have cultivation practices, and the gender roles are totally flipped, like the women bring in the money while men handle the housework, although women are still the ones giving birth. Plus, since the spiritual energy here is super low, it's tough for him to regain his strength. He had just battled a powerful demon, and they both ended up losing their bodies in the fight. Lucky for him, his spirit managed to jump to another world and find a fresh body to inhabit after someone had just died. That body belongs to a kid named Lin Mo, who used to be an average rich kid at a top private school. He has no clue if the demon he fought also got a second chance at life, but for now, he's stuck living as Lin Mo until he can get his strength back. It looks like even an emperor has to go to school here. His family isn't too shabby, but to him, it feels like his new home is even smaller than his old fish pond. His parents passed away in a car accident, and his grandma has Alzheimer's and is in the hospital. His aunt, who isn't actually related to him, became his guardian, took everything he had, and slashed his living expenses. The original Lin Mo was weak and had no backup, so he couldn't really stand up to any of the changes. As he moves through the house, he walks to a table where 2 people are sitting. One has brown hair and is called Liu Ying, while the other is Zixuan. His aunt speaks up, saying he arrived at the perfect time and letting him know Yanhui is right. His engagement to her is nothing but a joke. Hearing the name his aunt brought up, he starts to think. According to the memories of the original owner, his grandma had lined him up for an early marriage with a girl named Yanhui. But when she saw he was overweight, she freaked out. That totally crushed him, and he was so distracted that he ended up getting hit by a truck. So the whole marriage plan was off. He figures that an emperor wouldn't let someone else decide who he should marry. When his aunt asks if he's still paying attention, he tells her not to set up any more marriage proposals for him. His aunt picks up on something different about him today. Out of nowhere, she feels this weird vibe of authority coming from him. Lin sits down at the table but realizes he's not hungry because he's starting a diet. Still, he doesn't want to skip food completely, so he figures he might as well take it easy. His cousin brings up how he didn't study abroad and that his classmates think it's embarrassing that he admitted he liked someone. Lin wonders why he has to deal with aunts like this when he's technically an emperor, but he knows he has to play the part of a regular guy. He says school's going fine, and his cousin replies that it doesn't really matter as long as he gets good grades. Lin thinks to himself that he doesn't want to waste time chatting with him. After about an hour, Lin and his cousin arrive at their destination, and the driver lets them know they're there. His cousin tells him not to get out with him. Lin shoots him a look that's pure disdain, which totally freaks out his cousin. Once out of the car, Lin stands in front of a building and thinks the architecture in this world is pretty impressive. But there are some guys standing out too much, showing off their pale legs, while the girls seem pretty normal. At the same time, 2 girls are poking fun at his cousin Xuan's legs. Lin finds it gross and feels uneasy, but he tries to brush it off. He's not sure if the demon Venerable is still around, and he knows he needs to toughen up before she shows up. While walking around school, Lin finds his classroom. Some of his classmates are making fun of him because his fiancée is there too. A girl mocks him about his love confession to Yanhui, who looks pretty upset. Lin just rolls his eyes, thinking how boring people can be. He goes straight to his desk, leaving Yanhui looking confused. Once seated, he ponders how tough it is to refine his body without spiritual energy. Suddenly, someone grabs his shoulder and tells him he should really believe her when she says she can't like him. She adds that he wouldn't be confused if he listened to her from the start. Lin puts 2 and 2 together and realizes it's his desk mate, Yunshu. She keeps talking, questioning how he could like a second-rate person like himself. When Lin doesn't respond, she worries she might have gone too far. She tells him he could get a shot with Yanhui if he lost some weight. Lin tells her to just say what she's thinking. She asks how he figured she was up to something, and he mentions that she's never acted this way before. Yunshu actually wants to ask for a favor, but he turns her down. She insists that he play games with her, and in return, she'll introduce him to a girl even prettier than Yanhui. She also talks about taking him to the top of Wuzhu Mountain for the amazing starry sky, which would be a shame to miss. Lin remembers hearing that high mountains attract spiritual energy, so the top could be a good spot for that. Plus, this could be a great chance to lose some weight. He decides to go along with her plan and admits he's not great at games, which makes her happy. She mentions she has a match against some guy from Class 3, so after class, they could use the computers in the club room. Later, in the computer room, she says she's postponed the club activities today so they won't be interrupted while gaming. She asks Lin to log into his account. He types in his password and gets in without a hitch. Once in the game, he checks out the stats window and finds out it's an immortal-themed action competitive game. He notices his in-game name is Momo Baby. Yunshu shows up and tells him she called the King of the Kingdom for help. Then, the king appears and mentions how she really dragged a guy into the game. She seems to like Lin since he's a classmate of her friend. Yunshu cuts in and starts the 3 versus 3 mode. As the game kicks off, the other girl tells them to stay still while she takes out the other team. Yunshu tells Lin to hide while she checks things out. Lin thinks that only legendary beings are immortal, but the cultivation and magic in his world feel a lot like game mechanics. He's a bit worried there might actually be immortals out there, which is why he can't afford to be reckless. Out of nowhere, a notification flashes that Catslayer has died. She pops back up, all stressed out about failing. She gives it another shot, saying she messed up but is ready for revenge. Still, she bites the dust again and respawns, making excuses about underestimating the enemy. Frustrated, she takes off while Yunshu decides to jump in and help this time. Even with her support, Catslayer keeps getting taken out. Yunshu is fuming because the kingdom's king isn't stepping up and Catslayer is just continuously dying. She warns Lin to stay on his toes and not go down too quickly since Flying Feather is on the hunt. As he runs, Lin reflects on how he's honed his fighting instincts over thousands of years, which lets him tap into those skills even while gaming. Meanwhile, he has 2 girls from the opposing team hot on his tail, one of them being Yatung, who is convinced he won't escape. When Lin glances back and sees someone chasing him, he suddenly stops and thinks about how he's an emperor who's never been chased or killed before. Noticing that Lin has spotted her, Yatung quickly ducks behind a bush. Impressed with her speed, Lin realizes his body might not keep up since the game's attacks are tough to pull off. But without even thinking, he instinctively uses his real-life combat skills while playing. Yatung figures he's just some rookie who doesn't know how to hide. She jumps out from the bushes to go after him, but Lin reacts super quick and counters her with a sword strike. Before she even knows what hit her, Momo Baby takes Flying Feather out in an instant. The other girls watching Yatung are blown away and start thinking Momo Baby seems pretty skilled. Yatung is left speechless, realizing she's been defeated. On the flip side, Yunshu is thrilled that Lin pulled off such an epic play, but then she notices he looks totally unfazed and asks if he's okay. Lin is surprised to find out that his physical body can actually get hurt just from using a tiny bit of spiritual energy. Yutong jumps back into the game, but her friends have all been taken out by those cat killers. She runs into Momo Baby again, but he keeps dodging her. Flying Feather can't help but think this feels like an escape game or something. When Flying Feather spots him again, Lin figures he should power up his lower body and sends his sword flying at her once more. But before she can react, the sword hits her leg, knocking her to the ground. As she looks at the sword stuck in her leg, she starts to think maybe it's a hint for her to back off. Her crew keeps getting wiped out by Momo Baby, and one of her friends jokingly says Yunshu is going to laugh at their mess. Yutang then asks if she's got a line to their side and urges her to get in touch. She's fuming in her chair because of Momo Baby. Meanwhile, Yunshu gets a call from the girls who want to meet up with her. She approaches Lin and is super impressed, telling him he's awesome. She suggests playing a few more matches, but Lin isn't interested anymore. He walks off, reminding her not to forget that promise she made earlier. Later on, Lin is close to his house. Once he's in his room, he flops down, complaining that he's feeling pretty fragile. The next day, on his way to school, his cousin calls and tells him to explain to their classmates that the whole marriage with Yanhui was a lie. Lin responds by saying there's no point in clarifying something that isn't true. As he walks off, his cousin grumbles that he's acting too cocky. In the classroom, Yunshu spots Lin and asks if he knows who the girl from the game is. She mentions that Yutong goes to their school, and she tries to reassure him that the girl from the game wants to meet him but isn't going to hurt him. Before she can finish, Lin shoots her a warning look that makes her uneasy. Then he tells her he's not Momo Baby. Just then, Yanhui walks over, saying they need to clear things up and confirm their marriage was fake. Yunshu jumps in, saying Yanhui is being harsh, and reminds her that Lin is just a kid, so she should have a little more sympathy. Yanhui snaps back, asking what that has to do with her, and if Yunshu has a crush on Lin. Lin chimes in, saying it doesn't matter if it's true or not. There's no chance he'd be with her. He tells her to just go away. Yanhui responds that he's being arrogant and doesn't get how much it hurt her. She warns him never to mention marrying again. Some classmates notice Lin is holding it together because he hasn't cried yet. They comment that they would have left school if they were in his position. Then, a girl walks in. It's Yutang, the one who lost the game, hanging out with her friends. Some classmates start whispering that anyone who gets involved with her usually ends up dropping out of school. She comes over to Lin and calls out to him. Turns out, she's Yanhui's senior sister, and Yanshui asks if she needs something. Then, she yells for Momo Baby to step up. Lin just sits there, annoyed. It bugs him that everyone calls him Momo Baby when he's actually the emperor. His classmates are shocked, trying to figure out how he got close to Yutong and why she's calling him that. Yunshu jumps in to say Yutong just wants to play with him, and then he can do his own thing. As he leaves the room, Lin mutters that these people are really getting on his nerves. Yutong's waiting for him at the entrance to his class. She didn't expect Momo Baby to be a dude instead of a girl. She finds it funny since women used to fight in battle skirts, but now it's just the norm. She starts grilling Lin with questions, wondering if he's really the one who beat her in the game. She tells him to call her after class because she wants to hang out with him. But Lin says he's not into that game and only won by luck. He turns to leave, saying he's heading back to class. Yutong gets mad. She asks if this chubby guy has any idea who she is. Another girl chimes in that since he just got dumped, he's got nothing to lose. Yutong tells her friend to bring Lin to her at noon. Back in the classroom, a group of guys asks what Yutong said to him. Yunshu mentions that Yutong is impressed and wants to hang out one-on-one. She reassures him not to worry because she'll take him to Wuzhu Mountain this weekend and even set him up with some girls. Lin shoots her a look, telling her not to bring anyone else. Just the thought of being alone with him makes Yunshu blush. She insists he shouldn't get the wrong idea because she's worse than Yanhui. Lin thinks she deserves to be crushed for 100 years. The next day, one of Yutong's friends shows up, saying she's been waiting for Lin, but he's not in the classroom anymore. In the cafeteria, Lin grabs his food while others poke fun at him, saying he must really pack it away. At the counter, he asks the server to wrap it up for him. As he heads out, he thinks about how he still hasn't really adjusted to all the noise and shouldn't let it get to him. Just then, he spots a new girl walking his way. That's Jinyi, muttering something about merging with a deity. All the guys can't help but admire how pretty she is. She feels like she made the right choice and thinks she's been given a second chance with her new body. She believes her past experiences were just a tiny part of her story. After all the effort she put in, she finally took down the Emperor, but it wasn't the ending she was hoping for. She finds this new world pretty fascinating. Back in the demon world, her dad never gave her any approval just because she was a girl. The guys there looked down on her until she started wearing a mask and taking them down, making them fear her instead. But here, things are different as guys seem weak, and the spiritual power is low. Plus, she's so stunning that she thinks a chubby boy is trailing her. Out of nowhere, she turns around and their eyes lock, creating an awkward moment. Shinyi fumbles for words and finally tells him to stop following her since there's nothing worth pursuing. But Lin just walks past her, acting like he didn't hear her. She mutters that he must be off his rocker. Feeling flustered, she decides to regain her strength before leaving this world. She notices that boys here are more reserved. She assumes Lin must have been embarrassed, and is just refusing to admit he was following her. Lin heads upstairs looking a bit annoyed, and the girl tags along after him. She notices he's on his way to the rooftop and wonders if he wants to be alone, but then remembers that normal students never go up there. In this world, guys are pretty weak physically, so she starts to freak out a little, thinking Lin might jump off the rooftop. Even though it's really none of her business, she can't shake the feeling of worry. After all, her body's original best friend jumped off a building before. She speeds up to the rooftop, determined to do something for the body she's in. When she gets to the top, she spots Lin right at the edge. She tries to use her ability to control him, but she totally forgets that she doesn't have any spiritual power anymore. Meanwhile, Lin is just chilling, thinking it's too cold up there, and he should probably head back down after grabbing a snack. Suddenly, the girl shows up, yelling at him to wait. She lunges at him, wrapping her arms around his waist, and Lin, caught off guard, asks what she's doing. She tries to lift him, telling him to get down, but he's way heavier than she expected. She loses her grip and falls, ending up with Lin crashing down right on top of her. Ouch! She ends up breaking a rib. Lin, still on her, doesn't even get a chance to react and wonders what's going on. The girl, in pain, explains she was just trying to help because she thought he was about to jump. Now she's convinced she broke a rib because of him. Lin is shocked that she thought he was trying to off himself. He figures it's because, in this world, men are seen as weak and women as strong. He offers her a hand to help her up and tells her to stop overthinking things. He just came up for some fresh air and had no plans to jump at all. Plus, he's not into her. That makes her even more embarrassed, and she snaps at him to get out of her sight. Lin, amused by her reaction, wonders if she really wants him gone. He thinks it's funny that she turned down the help of someone who could help her without even realizing it. Back in class, Yunshu asks where Lin has been. She mentions that Yu Tang was looking for him and warns him not to run off after class. Lin throws it back on her, claiming it's all her fault, so she needs to fix it. But Yunshu insists on sticking with him after class to hang out with Yu Tang. She says if he lets Yu Tang win, that should be enough for her to leave him alone. Yunshu keeps pushing him, but Lin accuses her of causing all the trouble in the first place. She declares she'll do anything for him, but he still refuses to go. Frustrated, Yunshu starts to worry that she might be in some kind of trouble. Once classes are done, Lin tells her he's leaving and reminds her not to forget their promise at Wuju Mountain. As he walks off, Lin suddenly remembers something important. He thinks about that girl he fell on and wonders if she's okay. Lin thinks the human body is super fragile, so that girl probably ended up with some broken ribs. Since lives are precious, he could get in serious trouble if something happens to her, so he rushes over to check on her. Meanwhile, she's stuck on the rooftop, feeling her body weakness and not able to get up. The wind is really strong, and she's starving. She thinks about yelling for help but quickly shakes off the idea, preferring to just give up instead of asking for help like that. She never thought things would turn out this way. She, a demon who once took down an emperor, now taken out by a chubby boy. Then, someone comes closer. She sees it's Lin and asks why he's back. He kneels down beside her, and she's taken aback by what he's doing. He looks her over and notices she's not in good shape, yet she still won't ask for help. He places a hand on her back and tells her calmly that she's probably got some broken ribs and asks why she doesn't get enough exercise. But she insists she works out more than him. As Lin starts to take off his coat, she gets a bit nervous, wondering what he's up to. He wraps it around her and says it's chilly up there, so this should help her stay warm. He pulls out his phone and calls for an ambulance. The Empress insists she doesn't need his coat. Lin already knows she doesn't want to wear it because he's on the heavier side. But she remembers how fragile she is, so she decides to keep it on until help arrives. She didn't expect Lin to be such a nice guy. This world has its own standards for how guys should look, so she wonders why he bothered to help her out. She thinks she might keep an eye on him. Not too long after, the ambulance shows up. As Jinyi gets carried away on a stretcher, two girls notice the scene. She feels embarrassed and thinks she'll never forget this whole ordeal. Lin gets home at night, and his cousin immediately asks why Yu Tang came to see him. Lin doesn't really feel like sharing, so he keeps quiet. His cousin starts making fun of him, asking if he's mute or something. Lin finally says he'll only explain it once. Zixuan, who's a bit of a bully, notices that Lin seems tougher lately and assumes Yu Tang wouldn't have bothered him without reason. So Zixuan plans to have his mom kick Lin out. Lin can't believe Zixuan has the nerve to act like that in his own house. Zixuan then tries to slap him, asking if he brought this trouble on himself. But Lin easily grabs his arm, realizing Zixuan is so weak that it's almost embarrassing to hold on. Zixuan ends up on the floor, crying out in pain, and runs upstairs to tell his dad that Lin is picking on him. His dad flips out, yelling, and wonders how Lin could scare his cousin. He winds up to slap Lin too, but Lin catches his arm like it's nothing. Totally shocked, his dad stops, and Lin tells him not to mess with him anymore. Crying, his dad calls Lin a spoiled brat and yells for Lin's aunt, claiming he's causing all this drama. When she shows up, she tells everyone to quiet down. She glares at Lin and notices he's changed a bit, but she doesn't care about the fight. Instead, she demands Lin apologize to his uncle. Lin finds it hilarious. She's the first person to think an emperor should say sorry. He walks past her, saying he hasn't done anything wrong and isn't going to apologize. She warns him that if he doesn't, he won't get his vacation money. Lin tells her to do what she wants and heads to his room. Once he's there, he starts thinking about money. Without it, he can't go to Wuju Mountain. He realizes he doesn't have anything to sell around the house and no savings either. He considers selling some clothes and shoes and opens his computer, surprised to see buyers responding pretty quickly. 3 girls in the comments are asking some pretty weird questions, like if the stuff still smells like him. Lin, who's never really scared of demons, finds these women kind of creepy, but he's still ready to sell and make some cash. He starts wondering why money is his main issue when he should be focusing on getting his strength back. After all, a solid body is key to cultivation. If he could just absorb some spiritual energy, money wouldn't even be a concern. A few minutes later, he's totally worn out. His body can't handle the training without spiritual power. He realizes he needs to build his body up from scratch. Just then, he gets a call from Yunshu. She wants to chat about Wuzhu Mountain. Her friend mentioned that Yanhui would be there too. She asks if it'd be better to go another day since they might tease him. Lin says it doesn't matter, they can go any time. Yunshu reminds him that the bus leaves in the morning, so he better not be late. The next morning, Lin heads to the breakfast table, and Zixuan asks him why he's up so early and if Yanhui had asked him to go out. Lin just stays quiet. Zixuan wonders why he's not saying anything and if he's up to something. When the bus shows up for Wuzhu Mountain, Zixuan tells him to keep eating and lets their dad know the bus is here. Near the bus, Yanhui shouts over to Zixuan, saying she feels nervous and they should hop on quickly. On the bus, he mentions that Lin has been acting different since she rejected him and brings up last night's drama. Yanhui says she always thought bringing Lin to the mountain was a bad idea. Then Yunshu shows up and says Lin is coming too. She tells everyone not to say mean things about him since they're all classmates. She didn't expect Lin to be there, but she figures if he comes along, he won't feel left out. Finally, Lin walks onto the bus. As he heads to his seat, Yanhui stops him and asks why he pushed Zixuan. Lin looks at his cousin and jokes if it's like a hero saving a damsel. Yunshu jumps in, saying it must be a mix-up since Lin isn't rude. She calls Lin to the front of the bus, pointing out the great view. At the front, they ask the driver to stop at the next stop to pick someone up, then the bus moves on. Meanwhile, a biker zooms alongside. Lin just hopes he won't be let down when they finally reach the mountain. Glancing to the side, he sees a girl on a motorcycle. She recognizes him and speeds up, stopping right in front of the bus. And when she takes off her helmet, everyone is shocked to see it's Yu Tang. Yunshu starts to panic, worried Yu Tang stopped the bus to talk to Lin. She gets up to go chat with her, asking what she's doing there. Yu Tang says she's there to see the fatty. Checking out Lin, she adds that if he weren't so big, she wouldn't have spotted him. Everyone bursts out laughing at his expense. Yu Tang suggests that he should just come with her to the cyber cafe, where she could help him win back his ex. Annoyed, Lin tells her to back off. Yu Tang gets mad and wonders if she's really bothering him, insisting that if it weren't for that game, she wouldn't even be there. And if he's going to play or not. That's when Lin notices her amulet. It looks a little weak, but must have been crafted by someone skilled. Even though the technique looks pretty rough, he thinks creating something like that is tough in this world. Yu Tang, still pushing, asks why he's quiet and whether he'll play or not. Trying to figure out if cultivators are still a thing, Lin finally says he'll play after climbing the mountain. Then Yunshu suggests they all go up the mountain together. Yu Tang asks if Lin will actually make it to the top. The classmates start cracking jokes about her coming along to see the spectacle. Yu Tang quips that Lin isn't exactly popular. He's rounded like a ball, which is why she wants to witness him climbing. One guy suggests she sit next to him, but Yu Tang just tells him to be quiet and calls a friend to sort out her bike. When Lin asks if Yu Tang has that game, she's ready to play with him right away. But while he's eyeing her amulet, Lin says that if she loses, she has to promise him something. Yu Tang jumps at the chance, saying if she wins, he'll be her servant forever. One classmate tries to join in, but she tells him to beat it. Another one asks Zixuan if Lin's any good at games and why Yu Tang is so set on playing with her. Zixuan's clueless and just finds Lin annoying. In the game, Yu Tang is chasing Lin. He sees an opening and gets ready to attack. He's taken aback when she actually attacks him while moving fast. It lands right on her face, and the system announces Momo Baby as the winner. After the game, Yu Tang can't believe she lost. She's mad and wondering how he had such amazing accuracy. Lin tells her that his moves were all calculated and the game is super easy. She thinks he's a genius, not realizing he used his cultivation to boost his brain power. Since Lin won, she asks what he wants. Lin tells her to transfer. Yu Tang offers to give him money every month and even help him get his ex back if he becomes her coach. But Lin still asks for the transfer, thinking he has finally acquired the money to forge his body. Yu Tang pulls out her phone and sends the transfer. She adds her number, telling Lin he should pick up if she calls, but to avoid calling her or sharing her number with anyone. Lin thinks that even as an emperor, he's never as full of himself as she is. After standing up and complaining about the cramped space, she strolls over to Yanhui and orders her to move up front. Yanhui is furious, feeling like Yu Tang is making her sit next to that heavy guy. She wants to argue but is too shocked to say a word. Yu Tang tells her to hurry it up. Yanhui thinks about scolding her sister but holds back since everyone's watching. Then Zixuan jumps in and says Lin wanted to tell Yanhui something, so she should go see what it's about. She's on board, thinking Lin will finally admit that the marriage contract was just a joke. Zixuan is stoked too because it means he gets to sit next to Yutong. He tries to introduce himself, but Yutong shuts him down right away. She thinks that if she'd known this guy was so annoying and heavy on the cologne, she would have rather sat with Lin. When they reach the mountain, everyone is blown away by how tall it is. The girls hatch a plan to tire the boys out first so they can make them carry them on their backs. Yunshu tells everyone to stick with her and not lag behind. About 30 minutes later, Lin watches the guys and figures they're in way worse shape than he is. He knows that once he gets his strength back, he'll have them in check for ages. Yunshu sees nobody is stepping in to help Lin and starts to feel unsure, worried that others might think it's weird if she hangs out with him. 20 minutes after that, Lin is still making his way up the mountain. He's struggling and thinks he can't push himself anymore, because his endurance is the worst in the whole group. Noticing that Lin's slowing down, Yunshu feels like since she brought him along, she should probably lend a hand. She asks if he needs help, but Lin insists he can keep going alone. He thinks this tiredness is nothing compared to what he dealt with in his past life. Yunshu wonders if he might be overdoing it, especially after seeing Yanhui with his cousin. She tells him to take a break if he's too worn out to go on. Some classmates are surprised that Lin has already made it halfway, while a bunch of the other guys are too beat to keep going. But Lin, being determined, keeps pushing himself up the mountain. Near the top, Lin runs into his classmates who are coming back down. They're surprised he actually made it this far on his own. Yunshu thinks it's too high up and suggests everyone head back to grab a bite at a restaurant. But Lin's not having it. He wants to see the view from the top. Annoyed, Yunshu asks if he wants to risk it, but another girl tells Yunshu to let him go. After 20 minutes, Lin finally reaches the summit. Yutang, who's already up there, can't believe he made it. She finds it kind of cool, but also thinks it's too bad he fell behind. By the time he got there, everyone else had already left, leaving him on his own. Looking up at the sky, Lin notices some faint traces of spiritual energy. It's weak, but he starts thinking it might be a good time to jump back into training. With some effort, he figures he can outpace that venerable demon. As long as he gets the chance to train, no matter how long it takes, he knows he'll make it to the top. Then Yutong taps him on the shoulder and asks what he's doing. Lin says he's just checking out the view. She thinks he's pretty dull and doesn't chat much. At the same time, Lin can't help but think that if he were still an emperor, he would have taken out pawns like her without a second thought. Yutong then tells him it's her spot now, and he should come down. Feeling wiped out, Lin tells her to help him get down. Yutong tells him she won't bug him anymore from now on. She hands him a snack, saying he's her buddy now. Since she's bored, she decides to take off. When Lin opens the wrapper, he realizes it's a leftover sandwich. He figures since he's eaten beast before, this is no big deal. So he starts meditating, focusing on cleansing his marrow. Later on, as it's getting late, Yunshu calls Lin and asks if he's really not coming back. Lin responds that the place is nice, so he's planning to hang out there during the holidays. He thinks he should also notify his aunt. Calling her, he informs her that he will be away for the holidays. After the call, the receptionist asks what he can do for Lin. Lin checks in on the price for a room for 2 months, and the receptionist tells him it's 8,000 yen. So, he dives into his training during the break, tackling the mountain day after day and squeezing in some meditation. It's tough work, but he figures it'll pay off in the end. 2 months roll by, and Yunshu texts Lin, saying she's on her way to pick him up, so he should get his bags ready. Since she couldn't chat with him during the holidays, Yutong wouldn't stop bugging her, which is why she had to come herself. Meanwhile, Lin takes a look in the mirror. Even after 2 months, he feels like his spiritual energy is still pretty low. Looking sharp, he decides it's best to keep up the act of being just an average student, for now. Later at the hotel, Yunshu finds Lin's room, but when she sees him, she's totally taken aback by how good he looks. She's so shocked that she thinks she must have walked into the wrong room. Suddenly, she daydreams about what their future might look like together. Feeling a bit embarrassed, she turns to leave, worried he might think she's a creep for staring. But then Lin calls her name and asks where she's off to, reassuring her that she's in the right place. Yunshu asks if he's a friend of Lin, and he laughs, telling her he is Lin. She's speechless for a second, and then flat out says she doesn't believe him, thinking they just happen to share the same name. Lin explains that he's only lost some weight and asks why she's so surprised. Even though he looks super different, something about him still feels like the Lin she knows. He grabs his bags and suggests they should head out. When Yunshu looks into his cold eyes and hears his voice, she realizes he really is Lin. She remembers telling him that all heavier people have hidden potential and wonders if she'll get a compliment since she never made fun of him for his weight. She offers to help him with his bags, but when the driver tries to pitch in, she quickly steps in, feeling jealous and wanting to do it herself. She opens the car door for Lin and then mentions how hot he looks now, asking if he's been working out in the mountains. She figures all his hard work has definitely paid off, and she thinks when Yanhui sees him, she'll regret her decision to break up with him. Lin tells her to be quiet. Yunshu starts to worry if he's mad at her for not being there when he was losing weight. If she had been nicer before, maybe they could have been the perfect couple. But she tells herself there's still hope since she's still the closest person to him. She suggests they grab a bite, but Lin just wants to go home. A bit later at Lin's place, Yunshu says she'll catch him in a few days, but then the driver asks if she's not going to take Lin to see Yu Tang. She says no way, thinking she can't bring a handsome guy into a situation like that. Now she just needs to use Lin's account to play some games. His aunt asks who he is and how he got in. Lin tells her he's Lin Mo and that he just dropped some weight. Zixuan is totally skeptical, saying that even if Lin lost weight, there's no way he'd be this good looking. Then, their mom tells Zixuan to quit yelling and asks if Lin had surgery. Lin points out that since she has all his money, there's no way he could have done that. He then asks if she'll give him some cash for this semester. His aunt chimes in, saying she'll cover all his expenses, but if he pulls anything shady with his cousin, she's done giving him money. As Lin heads to his room, he's already feeling satisfied. His aunt watches him and finally starts to believe he really is Lin. The next day, Lin's in a car with his cousin on the way to school. His cousin asks why the driver is going so slow this time. The driver says she can speed up, but can't help stealing glances at Lin because he's just too handsome. When Lin steps out of the car, everyone around is blown away by his looks. They start whispering, trying to figure out who he is. His cousin, feeling a bit jealous, wonders why Lin is getting so much attention. Noticing a bunch of girls snapping photos of him, Lin feels like something's off. Soon after, he walks into his classroom and goes to his seat. Classmates are curious if he's a new student. Lin thinks he only lost weight, but even that has him standing out way more than usual. Normally, he wouldn't attract this kind of attention. He wonders if his aura's changed a bit. At the classroom door, two girls start causing a scene. Yutang grabs Yunshu, telling her she's got 3 minutes to bring that fat boy to her. But there's no fat boy anymore. Yutang warns Yunshu that she'll regret lying. Feeling the heat, Yunshu points to Lin and says he's Lin, who lost weight over the holidays. Yutang looks at him and seems taken aback, furious. She won't accept that this guy could be Lin, but Yunshu's not fibbing. Lin backs her up, confirming he's not lying. He even tells Yutang she can train with him anytime and should meet up after class. Yutang, still unsure, asks who he is again. Yunshu repeats that he's Lin and lost weight while climbing a mountain during the holidays. Yutang wonders if he really is Lin. Yutang walks up to Lin and asks if that chubby guy has really changed that much. Lin tells her to stop calling him that. Once she realizes his voice and vibe are the same, she finally accepts that it's really Lin. She says it doesn't matter if he's fat or thin. He should just wait for her after class. Yunshu pipes up, saying someone else used to play with Yutang, and Lin only joined to fill the group. Yutang shoots her a warning look and asks if she really thinks Lin doesn't know how to play. She accuses Yunshu of trying to trick her by using Lin's account yesterday and calls her the most conceited person ever, vowing not to let this slide. As Yutang walks away, Yunshu asks for a chance to explain, realizing Yutang isn't going to let her off the hook now. A couple of classmates come over and ask how she figured out it was Lin. Even if it's him, they think he couldn't have turned so good-looking without surgery. Just then, the teacher walks in and tells everyone to take their seats since class is starting soon. She expresses curiosity about how their holidays went. But when she glances at the back of the room, she's shocked and asks who that student is. Yunshu raises her hand, saying it's Lin, who's lost weight. The teacher notes that he's changed a lot and must have put in some effort. She asks if Lin wants to sit in the front. Before he can answer, Yunshu yells no. Another classmate argues that Yunshu promised to switch seats. Someone else chimes in that Yunshu grew a lot during the holidays, so she should move to the back. Yunshu feels like they're trying to take her seat, and she's definitely not letting that happen. The teacher tells them to cut it out and decides Yunshu will be the first one to switch seats. Two girls pull her out of her chair while she pleads to stay. Another classmate asks Zixuan if Lin really had surgery to look this good. The teacher announces that the even-numbered students will swap seats with those next to them. Then she says Li Jiang will sit with Lin. A girl questions if Jiang is really going to sit with Lin because she can't let Yunshu hog him all to herself. Lin looks at his new seatmate and notices that Jiang is a bit chubby and quiet, meaning no one will bug him. Yunshu ends up in the front, crying about losing her seat. After class, Lin stands up to leave. A group of girls swarm him, showering him with compliments, saying they'd be exhausted if they had to climb a mountain every day. Yunshu watches and thinks they're all fake. When Lin was heavier, none of them bothered talking to him. Unlike them, she never treated him badly when they first met. Lin coldly tells the girls to step aside. They quickly back off, letting him through. Another girl observing thinks he looks even more handsome with that attitude. Zixuan storms out of the classroom totally frustrated and jealous. Lin heads over to the cafeteria for lunch. A girl waves at him, offering her seat because she's about to leave, but Lin passes on it. Thinking those girls are all just playing games, he walks away. While waiting in line, the girls behind him are admiring his new looks, especially his good body. Then, Yanhui and Zixuan show up. Yanhui does a double take and asks if that's really Lin. Zixuan cheekily asks if Yanhui regrets breaking up with him now that he's all handsome and stuff. Another girl chimes in, wanting to chase after Lin, and asks Yanhui for help. She insists it doesn't matter if Lin had surgery or not, because she always liked him for who he is. Then she takes off. Yanhui rolls her eyes and calls her a hypocrite, saying it's funny that people assume he had work done. If she could have him, she wouldn't care if he was real or not. Her classmate decides she'll go after Lin on her own and heads out. Meanwhile, Lin is strolling through the school when Yanhui catches up to him. She tells him she's sorry for everything. It all hit her too fast, and she still isn't up for marriage. Lin accepts her apology but just says okay and keeps walking. Yanhui asks him to wait, but he just pauses and wonders what else she wants to say. She says she really regrets the things she said, but he just walks off. Yanhui watches him leave, thinking he's so cold now and wonders if she's the reason for the change. Outside, Lin hopes the rooftop is clear. As he walks, he spots a girl, the one whose ribs he broke. He thinks she might try to take his spot up there again. She glances back and says he resembles a guy she met before, but this one looks way better. Lin brushes past her, feeling a bit relieved. She thought he'd chat with her but now wonders if he's heading to the rooftop too. Shinyi catches up with Lin and notices he is climbing the stairs. She quickly surpasses him, wanting to get there first. Seeing her in such a hurry, Lin wonders if she really wants to steal his spot. He speeds up again, thinking how dare a mere mortal try to compete with him. Without hesitation, they start running to secure their place on the rooftop. Shinyi finds him very annoying, questioning why he isn't acting like a gentleman. She wonders how he can run so fast. If she loses, it would be a disgrace to the women of this world. Meanwhile, a random girl watches the commotion, completely confused. Back to the two, Shinyi asks why Lin is running, and he asks her the same. She then questions why he isn't running after her, but he responds that it shouldn't matter to her. Annoyed, she tells him not to talk to her like that. She says a boy like him who doesn't care about ladies will never get married. Lin wonders how an emperor like him could even think about marriage. He is a man of high status, descended from a line of great emperors. He tells her she isn't kind either because she is fighting just for a rooftop. As they both reach the rooftop entrance, they block each other's way. Suddenly they start pushing and shoving to see who gets through first. They both argue that this is their spot. Lin realizes he will have to use his strength to clear his path. But in the struggle, he ends up grabbing Shinyi's soft melons. She freezes, completely embarrassed and furious. Lin is also embarrassed, but he can't ignore that incredible sensation. He quickly recovers and reaches the rooftop first. He declares that she lost, and from now on, this place belongs to him. Shinyi, still in shock, demands to know how he dared to do that. She asks if he even realizes he just touched her milk cannons. Lin walks up to her, slaps her, and plays the ultimate Uno reverse card, saying she was the one who pressed her soft cannons against him. He almost forgot that men in this world are considered fragile and can't just act calmly in situations like this. Furious, she questions if he is really blaming her for touching him. Lin pulls out his phone and says if she doesn't leave, he will call the police. Jinyi glares at him and thinks about breaking this mortal's neck. Still recording, Lin asks her to repeat what she just said. But then, she seems to realize something. She remembers that in this world, women who hit men are despised. If she gets caught, she might be expelled from school. She realizes he took advantage of the situation to strike her, and even if she complains, people will believe him. Frustrated, she decides to let him off this time. She warns him that next time, he will be the one to leave. Lin smirks, thinking this woman is a real pain in the ass. He takes out his phone to check the news he read this morning, but he is surprised by what he sees. The news reports that numerous chickens on a farm have mysteriously turned into dried corpses. Authorities suspect a virus, but Lin remembers something else. The demon from before had a sword that could devour anything down to the bones. During their final battle, that sword exploded. The sword had tried to protect the demon, sending her to this world. He's starting to wonder if she's really dead. To become immortal, he had to chase after heavenly goals, but she just needed to kill people to get stronger. That's why he feels the need to figure out what's going on. Later, as the sun sets, Lin heads out of class, and the girls are still all over him. Yunshu pops up and says she'll go with him to Yutang's place. Lin tells her it's not needed, but she won't back down, claiming Yutang and her sister are pretty dangerous. She shares a story about a guy who got duped by his classmates and ended up in a bad situation. Lin tells her he's not interested in going there and asks her not to get too close. Yunshu insists he's got it wrong. Then she suddenly puts it together. She asks if he's really never going to see Yutang again. Lin says he's got more important stuff to deal with. She reminds him that Yutang spent all summer trying to find him, but he replies they can talk about that later. She reassures him that it's all good, and she'll explain everything to Yutang. Plus, she figures if she helps Lin out, he might actually appreciate it. In the car, Lin can't shake the thought that if the demon is really lurking out at that farm outside the city, he's going to take care of her, even if it means losing his soul. A bit later, Lin rolls up to the spot. He feels like he's got a little magic left in him, but it's time to put it to use. As he checks out a house, he notices some strong demonic chi hanging around. It hits him that the demon is still kicking. Just then, he spots someone biking over. It's Yutang. She waves, saying she spotted him from a distance and asks what he's doing out here in the sticks. Lin's puzzled about how she ended up here. It feels way too coincidental. He explains he took a taxi but realized it was headed out of the city, so he hopped out. Yutang teases him about still seeing himself as that ugly, chubby guy. Now that he's looking good, girls are going to start chasing him, and he's got to watch out for traffickers targeting guys like him. She reminds him to give someone a heads up if he ever gets into a jam. Then she mentions she has to drop off some orders but will be back soon. Lin can't help but think Yutang might be immortal. She's got some serious talent for tracking down demonic energy. Just as he's lost in thought, she shows up again. She mentions that losing weight seems to be causing him some trouble and asks for her helmet. After she puts it on, she says she's just trying to steer clear of any issues. As Lin slips on the helmet, he notices she's blushing, clearly thinking he looks hotter than those bikers from the internet. Lin can't help but wonder if this helmet actually offers any protection. Yutang, still flustered, thinks he looks cute, but wonders why she even had that silly thought. She mentions it's her custom-made helmet and warns him that if he breaks it, she'll dump him as a prize for the bad guys. She calls him a headache and heads off to check out the area. Lin keeps an eye on her and realizes she's heading straight toward where the weird demonic energy is coming from. Feeling worried, he decides to follow her to see what's going on. Meanwhile, Yutang seems to have wandered into a place she shouldn't be. An old lady spots her and asks who she's looking for. Yutang quickly pulls out a gun and says the woman has some serious guts not to run away. Desperate, the old woman says she shouldn't play such a prank because it is against the law. Yutang then asks if she knows the demon cultivator, but the woman says she is just a chicken farmer. Stealthily, she draws a dagger from her sleeve. Yutang, sensing her intent, fires at her. The bullet grazes her arm, making her bleed. The woman begs for her life. Yutang says she is a good actress but needs to do better to deceive her. Then, she transforms her pistol into an amazing sword. The old woman still insists she is not a demon cultivator. Yutang says the woman is only refining chickens now, but one day she might refine people. She has little cultivation time, but is already better than a monk. The woman asks how she noticed that. saying she will go further if she refines Yutong. She attacks. Yutong is ready for action. Quickly she advances on the demon, stating that the result won't change. She stabs her sword brutally into the monster's chest. Lin, watching everything, thinks that energy feels like it comes from a demonic sword. Yutong, however, seems surprised as her sword attack does little damage. She realizes this energy is completely different from the demon cultivators she has encountered before. She wonders what kind of monster this is. In a split second, the monster lunges at Yutong and she barely manages to dodge it. If that hit had connected, she would have been done for. The creature then charges up its fist with a ton of magic, gearing up for a serious attack. Yutong grabs a talisman and hurls it at the monster. For a second, it looks like it's working, but then the demon comes at her again. This time she's totally caught off guard. It sends her flying, and she crashes hard against the wall, feeling the impact. She coughs up blood, thinking she just can't believe she's lost, but then, out of nowhere, Lin steps in to protect her. She's totally stunned to see him there. Yutong tells Lin to get out of there right away, but he asks her to chill and speak a bit more respectfully. Then Lin shows off his magic for the first time. When the demon attacks, it just freezes in fear. Yutong can't believe her eyes and wonders why it suddenly stopped. Lin downplays it, saying it's nothing special, but the demon is clearly scared of him. As the monster tries to bail, it collapses to the ground, and there's Lin standing there, flexing his emperor-level powers. Yutong feels like she's about to suffocate from the pressure. She's seriously questioning who this plump kid really is. Across town at the Guyan Temple in Luobei City, a master is teaching her students about living with morals and discipline to attain immortality. Out of nowhere, she gets startled when the temple bell starts ringing. She's confused since it only rings for major world events. As the bell keeps chiming, she kneels, and her disciples rush over, checking if she's okay. She tells them the father of Taoism has just been reincarnated. Back with Lin, he's looking around and wondering where the demon went. But the creature's spirit is gone, leaving behind just a piece of a sword. To him, that's no big deal. He grabs the fragment, thinking it might be a trap to expose him, but he figures it'll be useful for cultivation once he gets rid of its demonic vibe. Now he just needs to deal with Yutong, who's still in shock, trying to wrap her head around what just happened. Lin casts a spell to wipe her memory of what she saw, and it works in a flash. While watching her, Lin thinks her spiritual root is top-notch, which is amazing even in his world. It means there's probably a solid spot for cultivation around here. Otherwise, reaching that level would be impossible. After using his skill, Lin suddenly feels a sharp pain in his heart. His residual soul is taking a hit from the overload. He decides he should bounce, but then he runs into two girls who call him handsome and invite him to a nice spot with them. Lin tells them to back off, or they're going to regret it. One girl laughs and says he should lighten up a bit instead of acting all tough. Feeling frustrated, Lin realizes that his messed up state of mind is keeping him from tapping into his strength. One of the girls grabs his face and tells him to listen to her. Meanwhile, Yutong is hanging back, ready to jump in. She shouts at the girls to get lost and gets ready to fight. She throws a punch at one of them, who barely gets out of the way. The girl tries to hit back, but Yutong takes her down hard. Another girl tries to sneak in a hit, but Yutong scores a powerful kick, knocking both of them out for good. Yutong walks over to Lin and asks why he didn't fight back, saying he should target weak spots. When Lin asks what those are, she tells him it's the milk cannons and questions if he even knows how to defend himself. As she's leaving, Yutong says she'll give Lin a ride home. When he goes to take off his helmet, she tells him to keep it on and just hop on the bike. He gets on, holding onto her shirt with just his fingertips. Yutong asks why he's grabbing her clothes and insists he should hold her waist instead. Lin thinks back to his past life, where holding a girl like this without being in a relationship would be totally creepy. But here, people don't seem to care much. Still, this bike is really fast, even if his sword could probably go faster. Late at night, they finally get to their destination. Lin thanks her for the ride and asks how much he owes her. The girl looks puzzled and asks what he's talking about. Calling him fat, she reminds him he was scared just a bit ago. Lin tells her not to call him that. Yutong points out that he used to not mind when people called him that. Out of the blue, she remembers something. She brings up how Lin ditched her once, leaving her hanging. She had asked him to meet after school to play a game, but he never showed. Lin explains that his family raised him to head straight home and that he wasn't allowed to walk alone. He insists he did wait for her. Yutong mentions she had an emergency back then. Just then, her phone rings. Picking it up, she asks if everything is taken care of. She confirms that the target is a really powerful evil. Yutong jumps on her bike, saying she has stuff to do, and takes off. On her way to wherever she's headed, she stops at a corner. After taking off her helmet, she suddenly remembers Lin's shampoo smell stuck in it, which makes things feel a bit weird for her. Meanwhile, Lin thinks he needs to get back on track. Zixuan calls him up, asking if he's causing more drama with Yutong. Yanhui chimes in, claiming Zixuan just can't help but speak without thinking. She's trying to say Yutong's a flirt. Lin finds the whole thing dull and keeps on going home. Once he's in his room, Lin sits by the door, mulling over the fact that if he keeps using his powers, he might end up hurting himself. At least he's got a sword fragment he can use for training. Not long after, someone knocks on the door. Yanhui pops in, saying she wants to have a chat. When she shows up with Zixuan, Lin thinks she's playing both sides. Then Yanhui says it's not just about looks. The more time she spends with her cousin, the more she realizes she likes Lin. She wants to apologize for everything and brings up how Lin's grandma would probably want them to get married. Before she can say more, Lin shuts the door on her. She pleads for him to believe her, saying they're going to tie the knot. But as an emperor, Lin's not about to stoop to that level. Thinking he's already hit the top of his spiritual formation, he knows there's still a long way to go. So, he starts meditating, treating it like a mental workout. The next day at school, a girl asks Lin to grab a bite with her. When he ignores her, she goes on to say he's super handsome but has a cold vibe. She thinks he's getting more and more like a movie star. Meanwhile, Yanhui and her crew are eating together. She glances over and sees a girl trying to get Lin's attention, but he flat out refuses. Zixuan wonders what the point is of being good-looking if he's always eating alone. One of the others mentions he once asked Lin about his weight loss journey, but Lin just brushed him off. Feeling uneasy about it all, Yanhui gets up and decides to call Lin since they're in the same class. Zixuan, annoyed, asks why she'd bother calling him, reminding her that Lin can't stand him. Reluctantly, Yanhui asks him to let her go because if Lin sees them together, it could lead to some awkward misunderstandings. Zixuan, annoyed, tells her that if she goes to get Lin, she shouldn't bother coming back, but Yanhui thinks that having Lin in her arms would totally make it all worth it in the end. Meanwhile, a bunch of girls is bothering Lin, and he can't figure out why he's suddenly popular with all these women. Then Yutong shouts for him to come over right away. Frustrated, Zixuan storms off in irritation. Some guys watching the whole scene think Yutong has a crush on Lin, which makes Yanhui even more desperate because she thinks Yutong is the worst person to focus on Lin. As for Lin, he can't believe Yutong is still calling him fat. Out of the corner of his eye, he sees Xinyi rushing by, and suddenly remembers that she might try to steal his spot on the terrace. As Lin quickly flies away from the scene, Yutong notices him rushing off. The girl next to her comments that Lin has become arrogant ever since he got a little more handsome. Furious, Yutong sends him a message, saying she will kill him after class. Lin walks up to the terrace, but Xinyi's already lounging in his favorite spot. She tells him that since she got there first, he should just leave. But Lin isn't budging. He reminds her that he beat her in their last race, so it's his spot. Xinyi fires back that she totally let him win because he's a guy. Then she cheekily asks if he really thinks she could lose. Lin suggests they head downstairs and race again to settle this once and for all. Getting a bit annoyed, she points out that all he knows how to do is run and wonders if he has any other talents, warning him that at this rate, he's never going to get married. Lin shrugs it off, saying he's not that special. He challenges her to pick any game, and he'll take her down in all of them. With a mischievous grin, Xinyi seems to have an idea. She grabs a cup full of game pieces and says they'll play with those. When Lin sees what she's holding, he starts to wonder if he knows what's coming. Then Xinyi asks if he knows how to play Go, telling him that if he wins, she'll give him one wish in addition to leaving the terrace. Sitting on the floor, Lin smirks, saying she won't be able to grant his wish. Xinyi thinks she's got the upper hand since she's been playing that game for ages, and her skills are unbeatable. What she doesn't realize is that Lin has spent just as much time playing Go and doesn't have many rivals in the immortal world. As they both get ready for the game, it's clear they're gearing up for an epic showdown of Go. During the match, both players are super focused. Lin can't shake the feeling that he still hasn't won, and wonders if that woman could be the reincarnation of a Go master. Meanwhile, Xinyi thinks that aside from running, Lin actually has some skills in Go. As the match goes on into the evening, Jinyi starts to feel really tense and anxious. She realizes things are looking pretty dicey, and if she's not careful, she could end up losing. Lin tells her that if she can't beat him, she might as well throw in the towel, but she fires back, saying he should be the one to admit defeat. She reminds him that classes are over now, so he should be proud of how far he's come and just head home. Right after, Lin's phone starts ringing. Thinking that he can never give up, he decides he will only leave that place with a victory. Shinyi also thinks that boys in this world can't come home late. Taking a picture of the board, she says they can continue the match the next day. However, when she is about to get up, she suddenly feels a shock in her legs from sitting too long. Since she is right in front of Lin, she ends up falling toward him, with her melons pressing straight into his face. That sensation definitely feels as soft as jelly to him. A moment later, Shinyi stands up on her own, completely embarrassed. She can't believe something like this has happened again. Then, Lin flicks her forehead hard and warns her not to touch him again with her soft spheres, or he will sue her. He also calls her a pervert. Shinyi thinks it is already the second time he has hit her, and when her strength returns, she will make him regret it. But for now, she will spend the night studying tactics to win her match. Outside the school, Lin checks her phone and sees it's Yu-Tang calling. She's really annoyed and demands to know why he didn't pick up, asking where he's at. When she finds out he's still chilling at school, she orders him to meet her at the school gate. Lin thinks it's wild that Yu-Tang spends so much time gaming at school but still manages to have such a high cultivation level. When they meet at the gate, Yu-Tang wants to know why he took so long and why he skipped all his classes. Lin just says he was napping, and she can't believe it. Then she mentions she's there to pick him up for a rematch, hands him a helmet, and tells him to hop on the bike. After a bit, they get to Yu-Tang's place. While checking it out, Lin can't help but be amazed at how huge it is. Yu-Tang warns him not to touch anything. As he looks around, he spots complete gaming setups and consoles everywhere. He thinks to himself that it seems like this house is all about games, with no signs of cultivation at all. Yu-Tang then asks Lin if he feels a bit out of place, and if he's not worried about being in a woman's house without knowing what's up. Lin starts wondering if she has something planned for him. Mocking him, she says, "Is a good idea. It wouldn't be a bad thought now that he isn't fat anymore." Without hesitation, Lin strikes her in the belly using a male self-defense martial art and warns her not to touch him. He thinks that this martial art is more powerful than he expected, as it can even knock out a cultivator in seconds. Yu-Tang gets up and says she was just joking, but Lin tells her he's not a fan of that. Getting annoyed, she claims they'll play over 300 rounds, convinced she'll beat him and make him pay for everything he's done. A little while later, they start the game. Lin scores a win against Yu-Tang, then wins 2 more. It just keeps happening, round after round, with her not getting a single win. With her head hanging low, she realizes she's losing 47-0. Out of nowhere, Lin quietly pulls a piece of paper from his pocket and says he has to bounce. It looks like some kind of paper puppet doll, and he slides it under the table. Yu-Tang, wanting to play one more game, offers to let him crash at her place or drive him home. Lin says they'll have to continue another time. When she suggests taking him home, he insists he'll just grab a taxi. Then, that doll Lin stuck under the table suddenly starts to tip over. It seems to come to life and begins to move around. Meanwhile, Yanhui is sitting in her room, lost in thought about why Lin skipped his afternoon classes. She's curious about where he might have gone. Just then, she gets a call from someone asking her to check the group messages because something crazy has happened. Looking at her phone, she sees a photo of Lin with Yu-Tang. Irritated, she starts knocking everything off her desk, screaming that she will kill Yu-Tang. She questions how Yu-Tang dared to take her Lin to her house. She wishes that the woman would have a motorcycle accident. Out of nowhere, she hears a voice telling her that cursing Yu-Tang isn't going to help. Then a purple crystal stuffed with demonic energy chimes in, asking if she's down for some revenge. Yanhui looks around the room and calls out, wondering who's there and telling the demon to show itself. The demon brushes it off, saying its name doesn't really matter, offering to give Yanhui anything she wants. She playfully asks if that's a witch straight out of a story. Feeling a bit embarrassed, the demon thinks there's something off with her. It claims to be the top divine sword from the immortal world that got shattered. If Yanhui helps it put itself back together, it promises to make her immortal. Without a second thought, Yanhui goes along with the proposal and asks the demon for help to become immortal. The demon is thrilled to hear this. In an instant, it casts a spell on her, and a purple crystal appears on her forehead. The monster tells her to open her mind so it can merge with her body. When she doesn't feel any power right away, the spirit asks her what she really wants. Out of nowhere, Yanhui asks to learn hypnosis. The demon responds that there are tons of skills like that. In her head, she thinks that if she has this skill, Lin will be completely hers. Lin is riding in a taxi, hoping his psychic powers actually mean something. He really wants to figure out what Yutong is hiding. After casting a spell, he sees the doll at Yutong's place light up as she plays around. Lin starts to wonder if Yutong is just pretending to be a cultivator, and how she made it that far. Furious about losing to a stinky fat boy, Yutong can't believe it either. Lin is fed up with her trash talk and decides he's going to beat her at every game from now on. While Yutang suddenly remembers she's got something to do, Lin's left wondering where she's off to. In another room, Yutang is changing into a suit, saying it'll do the trick. When she opens a closet, Lin sees a bunch of combat weapons inside. Even if they're not the best, he thinks it's impressive since they're hard to come by in this world. As Yutong rushes out, the doll jumps onto her clothes, eager to uncover her secrets. Eventually, Yutong arrives at a building, mulling over how she needs to find out what shampoo Lin uses because it smells amazing. Inside the building, she walks up to a door just as someone calls out for everyone to raise their glasses and toast the newlyweds. It's a wedding, and the woman notes that the bride is about to give a speech. Taking the mic, the bride thanks everyone for coming despite being so busy. Meanwhile, Yutong just sits there, thinking she can't wait for this to be over. Eventually, the ceremony wraps up and the party kicks off. Back with the newlyweds, the wife asks her husband if he's feeling tired. He reassures her that he's fine. He just needs to change and grab a drink. As they chat, Yutang suddenly shows up in front of them, and the groom looks worried. The bride senses something's off and asks if everything's okay. Yutang tells them that now her wish is granted. It's time for her to leave. Out of nowhere, the guy starts to transform. He asks if she really thought making her wishes come true would be a walk in the park, and then, bam, he turns into a werewolf. Just as he's about to pounce, Yutang pulls out a talisman. She leaps to dodge his attack, then draws her sword and delivers a powerful strike from above. He is knocked to the ground. Holding his neck, he thanks Yutong. In a matter of seconds, his head disconnects from his body. Desperate, his bride tries to save him. In his thoughts, he apologizes to her. Realizing he will never see her again, he thinks this is a stupid way to die. Returning to human form, his wife runs into his arms, begging him not to die. She orders someone to call an ambulance to save him. Furious, she declares she will kill Yutong. Yutong tells her that she never really knew her husband. He had a knack for draining energy from women and turning them into his personal slaves. She brushes it off, saying she was just doing her job and it wasn't anything personal. Then, she pulls out a talisman to wipe everyone's memories of what just happened. Right after that, the bride passes out. Yutong calls someone up, saying she's done with her job and they need to handle the rest. Meanwhile, the doll drops from Yutong and scurries over to the guy. Lin realizes it's actually a shape-shifting fox, which is going to come in handy. Lin decides to save the fox with a soul reincarnation spell. It looks like the spell actually works because the fox's soul pops out of its body. Then, the soul starts bonding with this paper, and before long, a little fox is formed. About 20 minutes later, the boy comes to pick up his new little fox. Meanwhile, there's this guy who thinks he's about to die. He got his revenge, but he wishes he could be with his loved one. Just then, someone calls out to him, using the name Shu, and asks if he really wants to die, or if he'd rather live. When he opens his eyes in this dark abyss, he realizes he doesn't want to die. He's got so much left to say to his wife, and no matter what, he wants to stick around. The boy tells him that he can give him a new life, but he has to serve him for 10 years in return. The little fox then opens his eyes and transforms into a young foxman with long gray hair. He takes in his surroundings during the ritual and spots the boy, who's just standing there, quiet. Shu has never seen such powerful magic before and wonders if it was the boy who summoned him. He figures out that this kid is the strongest person he's ever come across. The little guy drops to his knees and introduces himself as Shu, ready to serve his master. Lin wants to know everything about cultivation in this world. Shu asks where he should begin. Shu explains that energy is pretty scarce around here, so cultivators go to these secret realms that are all controlled by powerful clans. Regular practitioners can't just join sects without connections. They get picked up by clans, used as fuel for cultivation, and then tossed aside when they're no longer useful. The boy realizes this has turned into a pretty messed up cultivation practice. Shu agrees and points out that the lack of energy is what drives this evil behavior. Our boy asks if they look like the cultivator Yu Tang. Shu says they do, and adds that this girl is super talented and from the Zhou family, one of the big three families. Lin wonders if there's really an immortal realm, but the little guy admits he has no clue. Then Shu suddenly shouts, asking if he can see his beloved during the next 10 years of service. Our boy is cool with it, but warns him never to reveal himself. Shu can't believe how lucky he is to have such a generous master. He thinks it's wild how easy it is to chat with powerful folks. The next day, Shu is taken aback. While hanging out in a backpack, he realizes his master is an ordinary high school student. He starts to think that maybe his master is the school principal or something. Shu figures our protagonist must be super popular since all the girls are eyeing him. He thinks that if he were a girl, he'd totally be hitting on our boy too. Meanwhile, our boy wonders what Shu is always thinking about since he never stops dreaming up inappropriate stuff. Soon, our boy gets to his seat and notices something odd. Some snacks are sitting underneath. Lin suspects they're from that annoying buddy of his, Yunshu. Then Yanhui walks up, saying she grabbed his favorite snacks for him. Lin is shocked it's her. His cousin shows up and gets really mad, saying she's just treating her fiancé well. This gets Zixuan totally furious. Frustrated, he almost slaps the girl, but Yanhui grabs his hand and tells him to chill out. He figures that his cousin's not going to slap anyone anytime soon. Yanhui warns him that she'll only say this once. If he keeps bothering the guy, she's going to come after him. Zixuan feels totally helpless. He ends up running off in tears, leaving the girl by herself. She tells him that if anyone gives him trouble, just call her and she'll come take care of it. The girls think it's pretty ironic that she suddenly shows interest in him now that he's acting bolder and looking more attractive. By noon, in the school cafeteria, Yutong's friend tells her that Yanhui is trying to steal her guy, but she just rolls her eyes, calling them a bunch of idiots, and figures the girl can have the chubby dude since she's not into him anyway. Just then, Yanhui walks in with a smug look on her face that catches her attention. She calls out to Lin and invites him to eat with her. Yutong's friend thinks Yanhui is just trying to get under her skin. Yutong isn't taking it too seriously either, but she gets super aggressive and warns our boy not to listen to Yanhui, or she'll go off on him. Our boy is feeling totally fed up and decides to leave the cafeteria. He can't believe he lost it after all those years of keeping his cool. He thinks he still has a lot to learn. Shu thinks it's kind of wild that even someone like Yu Tang feels jealous because of him. Yu Tang, fuming, asks if the boy really dissed her. Her friend tells her to chill and not flirt with our boy in front of everyone, or they won't get hitched. So, she decides to drop the fat guy and focus on Yanhui since she's the one who keeps poking her. Finally, our boy makes it to the rooftop at school. Xinyi, munching on a pastry, tells him to speed things up. He notices she's giving off some serious bad vibes. He figures she's still ticked about yesterday. He plops down and makes his first move in their game. She knew he'd complicate things for her, but she had planned ahead. Impressed, he thinks she's really got skills in this game. But then his stomach growls loudly. Holding a bag, he stares at her blankly, then opens it to reveal a lunchbox. He breaks his chopsticks and digs in. Xinyi complains that this is all about respect and he's eating when he should be playing. He shrugs it off, saying it's lunchtime. She warns that if he keeps this up, he'll end up getting fat. But then she asks about that fat guy they saw on the roof. Our boy says he's never seen anyone who fits that description. She gets mad and says just thinking about that guy makes her ribs hurt from laughing at his weight. But her expression flips when she sees something on her phone. It's a pic of our boy posted in the girls' group, and she suddenly realizes he's the fat guy from before. Furious, she brings it up and demands to know if he really doesn't know this person. Without a second thought, our guy says he has no clue who he is, which really annoys the girl. She tells him he can't pull that on anyone, but she gets that he doesn't want to dive into his past. So she's not going to stress about it because she's just here to play. She digs around in her bag and pulls out his coat, saying she washed it. She wonders if it'll still fit him now with his new build. He's a bit confused by the whole thing. Then Xinyi stands up and calls their game a draw. She compliments him, saying he's really good. He admits that not many can match him, but she's one of the few who caught him off guard. She says their match is done, but walking away like this leaves him kind of speechless. With determination, he calls her back and suggests a best of 3 to settle who wins for real. She beams and agrees, then finally introduces herself as Jinyi. He's taken aback at first. Suddenly, Shu pops out of his pocket, shocked. He's impressed that his master is so strong that all these girls are fawning over him. But our guy's got a question about where the resources for his demonic cultivation come from. Shu answers that they're from the Dark Door web. The Dark Clan looks out for these resources and helps out demonic cultivators and other families too. But they sell to decent folks if they have the cash. Our guy's surprised and asks how Shu got money. Shu says through assassination gigs, but adds that the quickest way is to score a sugar mommy. He figures his master doesn't need to work, so that would be the best route. Our guy grabs him as Shu squirms, telling him he's off base. Lin sets him down, thinking that when they get back home, he'll check out the materials, especially how to whip up some spiritual charms. As night falls at school, Yutong calls him the fat guy she knows, but he just swerves her. This ticks her off, and she tells him not to act like he didn't notice her. She goes on about how his ex-girlfriend messed with her and tried to make her look bad. But our guy corrects her, saying Yanhui isn't his ex. Yutong brushes it off and tells him to cooperate since she's a respectable person. Then she throws out the idea of a motorcycle ride. He stays blank, thinking over her words. She grins playfully and asks if he can get on by himself or if she needs to carry him. He agrees, and they head to the motorcycle. She calls him a good boy. Across the street, Yanhui sees them and gripes about Yutong taking her precious Lin. Demon Chi asks why she doesn't just hypnotize him. She reveals that she wants Lin to give himself to her willingly, with all his heart. Both of them rush out of school. Our guy tells Yutong it's time she stops holding on to him. She grins playfully and says he's way too naive if he believes anything a girl says. He warns her not to chase after him like the others, leaving her blushing and unsure. Suddenly the motorcycle halts, and she, with a red face, insists she's not after him. He asks if she really means that. Yutang fights back, trying to deny it, but he shrugs it off, saying they're just colleagues, so she shouldn't get too close. She mentions that plenty of guys want to be her boyfriend, but without all the games, she wouldn't have even noticed him. Shu thinks it's pretty surprising what his master is up to. He wonders how Lin managed to make that paper doll and do it with just a regular A4 sheet. Later, in his room, our guy thinks about the Dark Door network. He calls on his little buddy, who hops onto the table. With determination, he starts clicking away on his keyboard, claiming he'll get into Dark Door super fast. But instead, he ends up on a website filled with suggestive content, renting semi-late ladies and explicit books. Lin questions if he's on the right site, and Shu confirms and tells him to check out the treasure page. Shu thinks he's found the real deal in the cultivation world, but even a basic Immortal Realm weapon is considered a top treasure here. He needs stuff like 1,000-year-old ginseng and immortal stones, but they're priced at over $1 million. Shu still suggests selling his picks to rich older women. Our guy, looking distressed, asks if he really looks that poor. Shu finally gets the hint. He then asks Shu how much cash he has, and the little guy says he's got 30,000 in his account. Lin figures that's enough. Shu questions if his master is really going to make talismans. He advises seeking something else since talismans are tough to produce despite selling well, plus the materials available are low quality. Lin states he'll stick to making low-level talismans for sale. He tells Shu to get back to training. Shu thinks with the materials they have, they can only make junk. The next day, Lin wears a getup that hides his identity, complete with a mask and glasses. A guy in a van asks if the delivery is for him. Lin plays it cool and replies as the White Fox. The delivery person hands over a big box and asks for a 5-star rating. Lin can't believe how fast the delivery is. In his pocket, Shu mentions that the Shadow Clan has a business network that competes with the big families. Later, our boy looks at 2 papers on his desk, and Shu questions if he's really going for the talismans. He mentions that masters from important families train for years before they even start, with only a 30% success rate. Taking a deep breath, our guy gets to work, swiftly drawing symbols on the paper. Before he knows it, he's done the dragon talisman, shocking Shu. Shu can't wrap his head around how Lin drew the symbols so quickly, claiming he even saw a dragon appear out of nowhere. Lin tells him to keep it down. These are just low-quality talismans. He wishes he had more spiritual power since he can only manage 2 of them and admits he needs more spiritual stones. Lin lists them for sale at $500,000. But when he posts it, he's stunned as the bids start skyrocketing anonymously. Shu explains that talismans are in demand because both powerful cultivators and regular folks want them, making them pretty valuable. Before long, Lin senses something might have happened with his paper doll. Tuning into its view, he sees Yu Tang on Dark Door 2. She sighs, saying investigating a missing kid is tiring. Suddenly, she spots the listing for a high-quality talisman with invisibility. She figures it's a good time to buy since she doesn't know this guy and wants to be ready to keep an eye on him if needed. Lin can't stop thinking about the spiritual stone and finds the missing teenager situation strange. He starts to wonder if it could be linked to the venerable demon. The next day at school during lunch, Lin heads up the stairs, but gets blocked by 3 guys. They start throwing insults at him, saying he's just pretending to get girls' attention and that he's still the same loser deep down. Yanhui thinks this whole situation is wild and sees it as an awesome chance. With a serious look, Lin tells them to move aside. The guys are furious, wondering how he thinks he can talk to them like that. Before they can say anything else, Lin grabs one of them by the face and smashes him into the wall in one swift move. The hit is so hard that it knocks him out cold. The other 2 look horrified and question if he really wants to die. Yanhui thinks this is the perfect chance to swoop in and get Lin for herself, but Xinyi jumps in front of her and tells everyone to knock it off. She asks what's going on, and the hurt kid lies, claiming they just wanted to be friends and that Lin started it. Xinyi isn't buying it, knowing there's no way to tell if he's telling the truth. Meanwhile, Yanhui feels like her moment is being stolen. She pretends she just got there and asks if Lin is okay, saying she heard some noise and rushed over. She thanks Jinyi for helping him, saying she'll take her out for dinner someday to show her appreciation. Then she takes Lin's hand, trying to pull him away. But Jinyi grabs her wrist, saying it's really messed up for a woman to take advantage of a defenseless guy. With a nasty look, Yanhui warns her to back off and not get involved. Lin tells Jinyi to ignore Yanhui and just let it slide. Yanhui realizes she's losing control, so she tries to hypnotize Lin, but it doesn't work. Her demon companion warns her not to mess with magic for the day since something feels off. Jinyi mentions that she heard Yanhui broke up with Lin, then walks past her, saying she feels sorry for her, which just makes Yanhui even angrier. She stands there, shaking with rage at Xinyi. Later, Lin gets home after school, and as he sits at the computer, Shu tells him someone's trying to offer 2 spiritual stones and a lot of cash. Lin realizes this person knows how to make a deal. When he sees the offer is from Yu Tang, he wonders if she's part of the Phoenix group and considers whether it might be a trap. He remembers Shu mentioning that the Phoenix group takes out demonic cultivators, so they should steer clear. But Shu explains that traps aren't even needed since the Dark Network, with the Phoenix group's help, takes care of that stuff daily. An alert pops up on the screen, showing the meeting point is Fangtong Station, which seems like a regular spot. Still, he decides to go in disguise like always. Xinyi thinks he's being overly cautious about it all. The next day, after class, Lin successfully wraps up the delivery. With the 200,000 cash commission, he figures he has 70,000 left in spiritual stones. He didn't expect the quality of stuff in this world to be so low. Thinking he can regain some of his spiritual power, he absorbs the energy from the raw materials right away. Then he uses 2 more talismans he made, unleashing a huge dragon from the papers. He tells Shu to sell them on the Dark Door. As he watches, people start commenting about the unknown master behind these talismans. Lin thinks it's kind of funny how backward this world is when they get so hyped over a simple first-level talisman. Soon, Shu is confused when someone offers 3 million for one, and that quickly jumps to 4 million. Someone from a group, seeing the wild prices, asks if everyone's lost their minds. They wonder how a first-level talisman can go for more than 3 million. Then, a voice on the mic explains that the invisibility talisman sold earlier was no ordinary item. Back at home, Yu Tang is keeping an eye on the auction. She clicks once, raising her bid by another million. Lin watches the prices go crazy, and he has to cover Shu's mouth to keep him from losing it. The bid soars up to a staggering 15 million in cash. People in the comments are trying to reach out to Lin, asking if they can meet up with him. Sensing some danger, he figures it's best to lay low for a bit since cultivators are probably going to be on his case. At least he might get something out of this. He checks on Yu Tang, who's still looking into the missing boys, all of whom are virgins. Turns out, it's linked to the Demon King. Lin watches the feed and sees Yutong doing her thing with some real-time surveillance. It makes him feel a bit uneasy that she's into this kind of stuff. She gets tense when something gross pops up on her screen and slams her hand on the table. The terrible person she's looking at then starts searching for ways to look better in pictures. He's on the hunt for weird filters, plastic surgery options, and facial harmonization. He even thinks about getting a flat stomach and longer legs. Yutong's practically feeling like she can't handle life after seeing such an awful sight. She confesses that even the chubby guy isn't as bad as this disgusting person. The next day at school during lunch, Lin notices Yutang rambling about something that makes no sense to him. But suddenly he spots someone in front of him. It's Xinyi, asking if he wants to play a game. She says it's cool if he's not up for it since she doesn't want an easy win. Silence fills the space as Lin stares at the board game. He eventually admits he's not feeling great and decides to bail. He doesn't want to admit he's backing down, but he also doesn't want to take advantage of the situation. He heads to the edge of the terrace to get some fresh air. He thinks that if he wants to tap into the power of Yang, he'll need to set up a formation, and the top-tier ones are demonic. If only he had a cup of tea, maybe he could make it happen. Xinyi warns him not to accidentally fall over. Lin just gives her a smile. He walks toward her, humming a little tune. Yanhui, who's been secretly watching everything, just gets more and more frustrated. As Lin is about to leave the terrace, someone grabs him. It's Yanhui, and she's fuming. Lin quickly asks Yanhui what's up with her, but she just goes all dark and moody. Xinyi, who's hanging out next to Lin, tells Yanhui to back off. Yanhui shoots back that Lin is her guy and warns Xinyi to watch out. Lin's just there, confused about when he became the center of all this drama. Later that night, Yanhui is chilling at home, soaking in the bath while feeling all kinds of stressed about Lin. She thinks she should have gone for him from the start, and this time, she's determined that he'll be all hers without any second thoughts. With a crazy look in her eyes, she decides to hypnotize him, turning him into her little pet. She sends her spell flying toward Lin's place, aiming straight for him while he's asleep. But he's got some barriers up because, he's an emperor. Suddenly, Shu wakes up, puzzled, and wonders what just went down. Lin suspects it was someone trying to hit him with a remote hypnosis spell and thinks about who'd be bold enough to mess with an emperor. The next day at school, Lin runs into Yanhui, who's blocking his way. She tells him to get ready for that night and come over to her place, her eyes gleaming with a wicked sort of excitement. She's convinced she's got him under her spell and that he'll be all obedient to her. Lin suddenly remembers that it was her who tried to hypnotize him the night before. He managed to stick a paper doll to her back, but now he notices the doll has vanished. Yanhui finds the doll on her and immediately burns it with her demonic powers. Her demon mocks her for not realizing she was being watched. As sweat drips down her face, she wonders who could be keeping such a close eye on her. The demon tells her it doesn't matter, because she can't let anyone mess up her plans. As the afternoon light starts to fade, Lin leaves school, thinking about the doll getting destroyed. With so many cultivators around, though, he knows he can't just jump into action. He figures he should reach out to the Phoenix group, and if his calculations are right, Yutang should pass by right around then. What he's about to do has a name: fraud. Yutang is taken aback when she realizes she just ran over Lin. She quickly stops her motorcycle, and he crashes to the ground. Confused, she asks why he didn't look before crossing. She tries to help him up, insisting he needs to go to the hospital. But Lin just stands there with a blank stare, leaving her confused. With a sly grin, he admits he's learned to be bad in this world. Yutong wonders what's going on with him and tries to pull him back, but Lin says he's heading to Yanhui's house tonight. Yutong is shocked. This isn't like him at all. She tries to snap him out of it, but he walks right past her, leaving her stunned. Yutong starts to think that maybe the fat guy really was hypnotized. She gestures with her hands to break the spell, drawing a star in the air and placing her hand on his forehead. But it doesn't work, and she questions how strong the person who cast the spell really is. Deciding to use the Ghost Fan Redemption seal, she slams a magical palm on Lin's forehead and brings him back to his senses. Turns out, he was just pretending. Rubbing his forehead, Lin asks what's going on and why he's there. Yutong is about to ask him the same thing. She wants to know if he talked to Yanhui. He admits he did, but shrugs it off since she's going to see her fiancé anyway. Flustered, Yutong reminds him he appeared right in front of her and got hit by her motorcycle. Lin brushes it off, though. She wonders how he's fine after being hit and why he won't go to the hospital. Grabbing him by the collar, she ensures he knows she doesn't want to deal with any potential lawsuits. Then she shoves a piece of paper in his face, saying she'll write him a check for whatever he wants if he promises not to use it against her. Lin muses if writing a few thousand zeros will get him some spiritual storage. Yutong then zooms off on her motorcycle, telling someone through her helmet communicator that she needs all available info on Yanhui. Before long, she arrives at Yanhui's house. She takes off her helmet and shows off a special ring before using her magical sword to break the doorknob. Inside, she sees family photos and eventually reaches Yanhui's room. There she gets a shock when she finds thousands of pictures of Lin covering the walls. She spots a bunch of manuals about Lin and flips through a few pages. Slowly, her face heats up from the not-so-innocent content. Just as she decides she has to put a stop to this, her communicator buzzes with a new issue. Yanhui has vanished.